I was born in London in 1938. The war had started in 1940. In the middle of this, I went to school as a 5-year-old, where we all wore the same uniform, same hats with a badge on, same blazers with a badge on. Yes, and it was from, I forget what time we started. It was very early, and we finished at 4. I remember I was 5, huh? And it was time to come home and do some homework, and then to eat dinner in the evening, and then bed. And that was our ordinary day. Yes. Interesting. When the teacher walked into the room, we politely had to say good morning. We never spoke unless we were asked a direct question. Otherwise, we put up our hands if we knew the answer to a general question. At the age of 7, I was sent to a very good boarding school, as my father had been killed in the Second World War and my mother had to go to work. At the age of 13, my mother had remarried. We went to Japan, where I went to an international school. My stepfather had to work out there, that's why we went. At the international school, I met all kinds of students from all over the world. At 16, I thought the world was my oyster. My stepfather's driver had taught me how to drive, secretly. The Beatles and the miniskirts and the beehive hairstyle were all the rage in Europe, and all of us, Japanese and foreigners, all desperately wanted to follow the new trends in Europe. And we were very sure to make sure that we weren't left behind. We were members of a very nice country club, only for foreigners, not for Japanese. And my stepfather was working very hard, long days. My mother was very involved with good works, you know, she at the church, at bazaars and charitable works. And I was having a ball over the weekends, which was my downfall, because unfortunately I drove the car at the age of 16. We had been to the beach, and I had my girlfriends in the car, and we were going home, and we passed, unfortunately, a very prominent lady. She passed us in her chauffeur-driven car and went directly to my mother to say that I had been driving the car underage with a chauffeur behind, which meant that I was sent back to England to a boarding school.
Super.
So at 16, I found myself incarcerated again in a boarding school. I was older, of course, but now it was the same thing. Uniforms, very strict, and we called the nuns Madam. And because we were one of the seniors, we had to have breakfast in a special room. Very beautiful room, carpets, very nicely done. And when Madam came in, we all stood behind our chairs and we waited till Madam came in and sat down. And when Madam had sat down, and then she would look at us, and then we would start to eat, and then we were not allowed to talk, because we had to make sure that we could pass the butter, pass the salt, pass whatever we had to eat. And we were served banana. I was taught how to eat a banana with a knife and fork. That I had never tried before. And the first time, I just picked up my banana and I ate it like this, and all of a sudden, Madam, she picked up her bell and went like this and said, "There appears to be one amongst us who does not know how to eat a banana like a lady." And everybody stared at me. And then I looked at Madam and I said, "Aren't I doing it correctly?" And she said, "No, we will teach you now how a lady eats a banana." And she took a knife and fork and she cut the banana in half with the skin, turned it over, and then she cut like this, and then you took your fork and you went and ate each piece. Yes, listen, yes, yes. And it was a very interesting experience for me. Yes, the whole thing. What else was I going to say? Go. So after I came back to Denmark, I was sent to finishing school. which I believe I don't think you have it in Denmark. It's to send young ladies to a school where you get polished up on your manners and behavior, and terribly boring. And I managed to stay there one term, and I thought I was suffocating because I was going to be an actress. I told the family that I was going to be an actress, and actually I did get an invite to come and try out for one of the acting schools. But my mother, she took the next plane and she came back to England and told me that I was not going to be an actress because with my face and my height, I would never make any money. So she enrolled me into something called Pitman's College, where I learnt to be a secretary. Yes. And that was it. So once again, we stayed in school, the boarders, until half term, and those of us who were lucky enough to have family or friends we could go to for a long weekend, then we would go. Otherwise it was until Christmas, the first time we would go back, and then the next time would be the Easter holidays, and then the last time would be the summer holidays. I don't know whether I was lucky or what I should say, but I had a godmother, Vakaladen på dansk, in Gudmore, who was a much older lady, very strict, had 3 boys, and she was also on the board of the London School of Music, and she would invite me sometimes home for the weekend. And I hated chamber music, that's with cello, and on Sundays before the car took me back to school, I had to sit there at tea time and listen to chamber music with other young people who she invited home to her house. But I had some wonderful friends at the school, and some of them, there was people who had titles in the school, but they were all called Miss So-and-so. We didn't know their titles. And for one Easter, I was invited to come to Denmark by one of the mothers. And right after that, I got another invitation from Spain, where one of my Spanish friends had been telling me this terrible story about how the locusts had eaten all the tomatoes in this grand farm that they had. And she invited me. And I thought it was much more exciting to go and see the locusts than to Denmark, which I thought was still covered in snow. So I told the Danish girl that I was going to Spain. When my aunt, who was my guardian, because my parents were still in Japan, she heard this, she wrote to my mother, or she phoned my mother and told her what I had done. And my mother was furious and said I was not to go to Spain. And she was absolutely furious with me. And later on, many years later, when I met my husband, who was a Dane, my mother said to me, "That was my punishment." And that's it.